like a computer, like a computer, like a computer.
Programming that we are constantly assaulted by throughout our life conditions us. It programs us to a particular worldview. To a particular worldview.
Is they are absolutely propagandizing the world with all of their theses about the nature of the universe that we live in, where we come from, our origins, the origin of the universe, and so forth.
The project is literally the secularization of the world, to completely strip the world from religious beliefs. This is the project, and that is why it is called Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new secular or worldly order.
A new study says the news media have been pushing a gospel of godlessness on the American public.
Sure, it's hard for some of you to believe, but you will never see it more clearly than you will today. I mean, it's just so amazing. The creationists were right all along. To be honest, they just didn't have the argumentative skills.
All of you are engaged in running your mouths, doing your business, multiplying, buying houses, cars, business, whatever you're doing. And when you're told about God, religion, life, morality, you're saying, look, I ain't got no time for that.
Because this media is here and designed to make sure that they ask no critical questions, to make sure that the only thing that they are concerned about is having a good time, The only thing they're concerned about is filling their bellies. The only thing they're concerned about is acquiring more and more material things. And so that is why today, one of the struggles that you have as young people, that when you want to do different events and you want to talk about real issues, you have the struggle of many of your peers who've been so conditioned in this matrix that they would rather party than listen to the truth. They would rather party and shop and go to the mall than to stand up for issues of justice. They're stuck in the matrix. But you have the responsibility of helping to wake them up,
Now, how do we know that there's a God?
After having been thoroughly brainwashed.
And how do we know that there's a creator?
About 15 billion years ago, there were no stars in the sky. There wasn't even a sky. All that existed was the primordial fireball.
Then, something happened. In a flash, everything suddenly expanded. This was how it all began. The first moment of existence. What we now call the Big Bang.
At the beginning of the 20th century, scientists believed that the universe had always existed, that matter energy was infinite. It had always been around. The model is called the steady state model, because the model of the universe that it's been around forever basically doesn't change. The universe is steady state. But what happened in the last 100 years is that model has been blown away because of the evidence. Observations now suggest, as you all know, that the universe began some 12 to 15 billion years ago. The first evidence that the universe had a beginning is the expanding universe.
Researchers wanted to believe in a universe that always was and always will be, eternal. But galaxies flying away from each other meant that once, long ago, they were clumped together. It meant something started them moving. The universe had a beginning. Today, it's called the Big Bang Theory.
This was first discovered in 1929 by Edwin Hubble, and it's the first evidence that the universe had a beginning. The second evidence the universe had a beginning is the cosmic background radiation.
The discovery of the cosmic background radiation was a fatal blow to those who wanted to believe in an eternal universe. the Big Bang proponents had won.
Now, the final evidence for the origin of the universe is the relative abundance of light elements. It's very clear now that the universe had an origin, and scientists have become to accept this. In fact, the equations of general relativity that Einstein developed had an origin of the universe. When Einstein developed his equations of general relativity, they showed that there should be an expansion of the universe and an origin, and Einstein didn't like that. He added something called a cosmological constant, which he later realized was not there. When we saw that the universe was expanding, that there really was an origin, he threw out the cosmological constant. He said that that was the biggest mistake of his scientific career, was introducing that. But when this Big Bang model was first proposed in the early part of the 20th century, it was received with great skepticism by the scientific community. Because the scientific community knew that the Big Bang opened up the possibility of having a beginning and a creator and someone who began it.
Have you ever asked yourself where the universe came from? Why everything exists instead of just nothing? Typically, atheists have said that the universe is just eternal and uncaused.
For example, Bertrand Russell, the famous atheist on the radio program, he said the universe is just there and that's all.
But the astrophysical evidence indicates that the universe began to exist in a great explosion called the Big Bang 15 billion years ago. Most laymen do not appreciate that not only were all matter and energy created in that event, but physical space and time themselves. This is of utmost importance, for it implies, as the Cambridge astronomer Fred Hoyle points out, that the Big Bang theory requires the creation of the universe from nothing. Now, this tends to be very awkward for the atheist, for as Anthony Kenny of Oxford University urges, a proponent of the Big Bang theory, at least if he is an atheist, must believe that the universe came from nothing and by nothing. But surely that doesn't make sense. Out of nothing, nothing comes.
Even atheist philosophers such as David Hume, he wrote in a letter, "I never asserted to absurd proposition as that anything might arise without a cause." Similarly, P.J. Zort, in his publication About Time, said, "If there is anything we find inconceivable, it is that something could arise from nothing."
So where did the universe come from? Why does the universe exist instead of just nothing? There must have been a cause which brought the universe into being. We can summarize our argument thus far as follows. Premise 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause.
It doesn't mean it's God, doesn't mean it's Jesus, doesn't mean it's Allah, it doesn't mean anything. It just means there's a cause for the universe. So we ask another question, what is the nature of this cause? And the nature of this cause, upon conceptual analysis, which means critical thinking about this cause, we come to some startling conclusions.
So the cause of the universe must be immaterial beyond space and time. Beyond space and time. Now there are only two things that can fit in this category. The first, abstract objects, and the second, an embodied mind.
So we're faced with two worldviews. One starts in the beginning with mass energy, the particles, and everything is derivative, including information. The other says the exact opposite. So in the first worldview, mass energy is primary and mind is derivative. In the other worldview, mind is primary and mass energy is derivative. And so far as tonight's lecture is concerned, it is the diametrical opposition between the worldview of materialism and the worldview of theism. It is a conflict between these two worldviews, but I want you to notice there are scientists on each side of it.
Now, what's the better candidate? Now, abstract objects, the problem with these abstract objects is they're causally effete. They can't cause anything. Like, for example, the number 1 can't cause anything.
The simple law of arithmetic, 1 + 1 = 2, never brought anything into being. I wish it did. It never has put any money into my bank account. If I put £1,000 into the bank today and later another £1,000, the laws of arithmetic will rationally explain how it is that I now have £2,000 in the bank. But if I never put any money into the bank myself and simply leave it to the laws of arithmetic to bring money into being, I shall be permanently bankrupt. C.S. Lewis, with usual brilliance, grasped this years ago. The laws of nature produce no events. They state the pattern to which every event, if only it can be induced to happen, must conform. Just as the rules of arithmetic state the pattern to which all transactions with money must conform, if only you can get a hold of any money. Thus, in one sense, the laws of nature cover the whole field of space and time. In another, what they leave out is precisely the whole real universe. The incessant torrent of actual events, which makes up true history, that must come from somewhere else. To think the laws can produce it is like thinking that you can create real money by simply doing sums. For every law says in the last resort, if you have A, then you will get B. But first catch your A. The laws will not do it for you. Now, scientists love developing theories involving mathematical laws to describe natural phenomena, which enable them to make predictions, and they've done it with spectacular success. But most are aware, I think, that on their own the theories and laws that they found cannot create anything, let alone a universe. Yet Hawking seems to think they did.
Professor Stephen Hawking says that modern science has established there was no need for God in the creation of the universe. In a new book, Hawking suggests that a theoretical framework known as M-theory can explain how the Big Bang was an inevitable consequence of the laws of physics.
According to him, it is the laws of physics, not the will of God, that provide the real explanation as to how the universe came into being. The Big Bang, he argues, was the inevitable consequence of these laws. I quote, "Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing." Now, a supernatural being, or God, is an agent who does something. Dismissing such an agent, Hawking ascribes creative power to physical law. But physical law is not an agent. Hawking, it seems to me, is making a classical category mistake by confusing two entirely different kinds of entity: physical law and personal agency. Our physical laws are a description, usually mathematical, of what normally happens under certain given conditions. This is surely obvious from the very first example that Hawking gives in his book. The sun rises in the east. But this law does not create the sun, nor the planet Earth with east and west. It is descriptive and predictive, but not creative. Similarly, Newton's laws of gravitation doesn't create gravity or the matter in which gravity acts. In fact, it doesn't even explain gravity, as Newton himself realized. But it's even worse. The laws of physics cannot even cause anything to happen. Newton's celebrated laws of motion never caused a pool ball to race across the table. That can only be done by people using a pool cue in the action of their muscles. Suppose, to make matters clearer, we replace the universe by a jet engine, and we are asked to explain it. Shall we account for it by mentioning the personal agency of its inventor, Sir Frank Whittle? Or shall we, following Hawking, dismiss personal agency and explain the jet engine by saying it arose naturally from physical law? Now, this would be absurd. It is obvious we need both levels of explanation in order to give a complete description. It is also obvious that the scientific explanation neither conflicts nor competes with the agent explanation. They complement one another. It is the same with explanations of the universe. God does not conflict or compete with the laws of physics as an explanation. God is actually the ground of all explanation, in the sense that he is the ultimate cause in the first place of there being a world for the laws of physics to describe. Now, there's more to this, because the laws of physics can explain how the jet engine works, but not how it came to exist in the first place. Jet engine needed the intelligence and creative engineering work of Whittle. Indeed, come to think of it, the laws of physics plus Frank Whittle could not actually produce a jet engine on their own. There also needed to be some material subject to those laws that could be worked on by Whittle. Matter, ladies and gentlemen, may be humble stuff, but it is not produced by laws. I submit to you that the world of strict naturalism, in which clever mathematical laws all by themselves bring the universe and life into existence, is pure science fiction. Now, Hawking here echoes Peter Atkins, a colleague at Oxford, a well-known atheist who believes that space-time generates its own dust in the process of its own self-assembly. Atkins dubs this the cosmic bootstrap principle, referring to the self-contradictory idea of a person lifting himself by pulling on his own bootlaces. Philosopher of religion Keith Ward is surely right to say that Atkins' view of the universe is as blatantly self-contradictory as the name he gives to it, pointing out that it is logically impossible for a cause to bring about some effect without already being in existence. Ward concludes, between the hypothesis of God and the hypothesis of a cosmic bootstrap, there's no competition. We were always right to think that persons or universes who seek to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps are forever doomed to failure. What perhaps all this goes to show is that nonsense remains nonsense even when talked by world-famous scientists.
So the only alternative is an embodied mind, what theists call God. An embodied mind immaterial outside time and space.
So there's a God. Then you have to say, but sorry, where did God come from? It's not a question I hear often answered.
In order to recognize that an explanation is the best, you don't have to have an explanation of the explanation. In order to recognize that an explanation is the best, you don't have to be able to explain the explanation. Folks, this is an elementary point in the philosophy of science. Suppose astronauts were to find on the backside of the moon a pile of machinery there that had not been left by American or Russian cosmonauts. What would be the best explanation for that machinery? Well, clearly it would be some sort of extraterrestrial intelligence that had left the machinery there. And you don't have to have an explanation of who these extraterrestrials were or came from or how they got there or anything of that sort in order to recognize that the best explanation of this machinery is intelligent design. In order to recognize an explanation as the best, you don't have to have an explanation of the explanation. In fact, when you think about it, requiring that would immediately lead to an infinite regress of explanations. You would need an explanation of the explanation, but in order to recognize that as best, you need an explanation of the explanation of the explanation, and then an explanation of the explanation of the explanation of the explanation, and so that nothing could ever be explained.
One of the outdated philosophical cliches, in my opinion, is that, well, who created God? We hear that all the time. And they think it's a baseball bat against the theists. but it's made of sponge. And let me tell you why. If we say what caused the cause that caused the universe, then let's continue. What caused the cause that caused the cause that caused the universe? Let's continue. Then what caused the cause that caused the cause that caused the cause that caused the universe? Let's carry on. Then what caused the cause that caused the cause that caused the cause that caused?
And that goes on and on and on backwards. But at one point, I have to have an uncaused cause, or there would be nothing in existence today. Think of a string of dominoes. You have a domino that knocks over a domino that knocks over a domino. I have to have a first domino, or that string of falling could never start.
So in essence, to claim who created God or what caused the cause of the universe is equivalent of saying that we don't have a universe. That we don't have a universe.
Remember the premises of the argument I gave. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Something cannot come into being out of nothing. But if something is eternal and timeless, then it doesn't fall under that first premise. It doesn't need a cause. And the concept of God is the concept of an eternal, self-existent, necessary being, and therefore the answer is simply that God is uncaused. He is self-existent.
Dear Dr. Craig, one of the objections which has been raised is the first law of thermodynamics, the rule that matter and energy can only be rearranged, or in other words, that matter is neither being created nor destroyed.
Yeah. What's funny about this objection is that this is not an objection to the existence of God. This would be an objection to the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe. It would show that the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe is false, because according to that theory, all matter and energy, even space and time themselves, came into being at the moment of the Big Bang, and are therefore not eternal. They haven't always been there in the past. So if these fellows were right, all contemporary cosmologists who believe in the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe would be contradicting the laws of thermodynamics, and that's hardly the case. Why? Well, because the laws of thermodynamics, in particular the law of the conservation of matter and energy, only applies once the universe comes into being. It applies at every moment, at every time, and every point in the universe. But it doesn't apply to the origin of the universe itself. And that's why cosmologists don't consider that the law of conservation of energy and mass is violated by the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe. In fact, the atheist fellow mentioned the laws of thermodynamics. He might have wanted to talk about the second law of thermodynamics, which says that in a closed system, things tend toward increasing disorder. Now, the universe on the atheistic view is just a gigantic closed system, because it is everything there is, and there's nothing outside it. And what that implies is that given sufficient time, everything in the universe would grind down to a state of maximum disorder. So if the universe has existed for infinite time from eternity past, why is it that we don't find ourselves in this sort of thermodynamically disordered state? I think that the best answer to that is that the universe has not existed forever. It began a finite time ago in a low entropy condition, and the thermodynamic clock has been running ever since then. So the evidence of thermodynamics itself suggests that the universe and matter and energy are not infinite or eternal in the past, but had an absolute beginning.
To remind ourselves of the argument again, we have premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. And from that, we draw the conclusion that the universe had a cause. The universe had a cause. The universe had a cause.
So we ask another question: what is the nature of this cause? And the nature of this cause, upon conceptual analysis, which means critical thinking about this cause, we come to some startling conclusions. This cause must be one. The reason for this is because if we use the philosophical principle Occam's razor, which posits that we do not multiply entities beyond necessity, then we conclude it must be one. This cause must be uncaused, as we have already discussed the absurdity of an infinite regress of events, similarly with causes. This cause must be immaterial, because it created the sum of all matter, which is the universe itself. Significantly, brothers, sisters and friends, this cause must be personal. The reason I'm saying this is how else can an eternal cause bring into an existence a finite effect, the universe that had a beginning in time? It must have chosen the universe to come into existence, and choice indicates a will, and a will indicates a personality. So, we have concluded the traditional view on God, that a transcendental, immaterial, uncaused, eternal being exists. Being exists.
Some strange results have come up in about the last 20, 30 years, particularly in astronomy and also in quantum physics, which suggests that the universe actually may have a purpose, and some physicists are now suggesting it does have a purpose. And this has come out of some findings about the some of the fundamental numbers in atomic physics.
During the past 40 years, scientists have determined the relative strengths of each of these primary laws and forces. These strengths are so critically balanced, they are often described as being finely tuned.
These are numbers like the mass, the weight of an electron, the weight of a quark, the strength of gravity, the strength of the electromagnetic field. About 20 numbers that describe those and other parameters, features of our world, but nobody knows why it is that those numbers have the particular values that they do. Now, you could easily say, yeah, who really cares? You change the mass of the electron by a little bit more, a little bit less. Does it really matter? And the answer is it does. See, it turns out that if you imagine that we had 20 dials right here, and we could fiddle with those 20 numbers at will, even a small change to the values of the known values of those numbers would cause the world as we know it to disappear.
Because it turns out, and this is a very surprising and unexpected discovery, that the laws of physics, the basic given fabric of the world, had to be very specific, very finely tuned, as we sometimes say, for the possibility of carbon-based life appearing at all.
For example, the strengths of the other forces are all important, the masses of the various subatomic particles. This is one of a long list of properties in underlying physics that seem to be prerequisites for a universe with life. If all of these things were even a little bit different, then life, certainly life as we know it, could not exist.
It's a very surprising conclusion, but it's true, and all scientists will acknowledge that's the case.
Bernard Carr is a cosmologist and studies how the laws of physics operate in the universe. He says that the laws of nature are so finely tuned to enable complex life to exist that it is extremely unlikely that this could have happened by chance. Such fine-tuning, Carr believes, at least raises the possibility of a tuner.
This is a diagram, it's called the pyramid of complexity, and what we've got here, we've got the different levels of structure in the universe, and at the bottom we've got the things like quarks that make up the atoms, and the atoms build up to make molecules, the molecules build up to make living cells, the cells make organisms, and eventually we end up with brains and consciousness. It's rather hard to estimate what the probability is, but it was clearly very, very unlikely that those fine-tunings which allowed this pyramid of complexity to arise would be there.
A very simple and central example is the question of where does carbon come from? The very early universe doesn't make any carbon. It's very simple, it only makes simple things. Hydrogen and helium, and they're pretty boring in terms of chemistry. Now, where does carbon come from? There's only one place in the whole universe where carbon is made, and it's in the interior nuclear furnaces of the stars. We are people of stardust, made of the ashes of dead stars. And it turns out that the process by which carbon is made inside the stars is an extraordinarily delicate process. In fact, it looked at first sight as though it couldn't happen at all. It's only possible because there's a very large enhancement effect, called a resonance in the trade, which makes it go much quicker than we might have expected. And that resonance is there because the laws of nuclear physics take a very specific form. If they were a little bit different, either there would be no resonance or it would be in the wrong place at the wrong energy. That's a very striking example of how finely tuned the universe has to be for us to be inhabitants of it?
The fine-tunings, how fine-tuned are they? Most of them are 1% sort of things. In other words, if a thing is 1% different, everything is bad. And a physicist could say, maybe those are just luck. On the other hand, this cosmological constant is tuned to 1 part and 10 to the 120, 120 decimal places. Nobody thinks that's accidental. That is not a reasonable idea, that something is tuned to 120 decimal places just by accident. That's the most extreme example of fine-tuning.
No force in the history of cosmology has ever been discovered to be that finely tuned. The cosmological constant needs to be set to 1 part in a trillion, 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 trillion. Otherwise the universe would be so drastically different that it would be impossible for us to evolve. That the cosmological constant arrived at such a tiny value by chance seemed to be out of the question.
Ils sont nombreux à dire que finalement, quand on regarde l'univers, surtout à l'origine, eh bien on constate qu'il ne peut pas être né par hasard, et que le hasard n'a aucun rôle, et que plus on remonte loin dans le temps, donc plus on remonte vers le Big Bang, plus on trouve un univers qui est ordonné, réglé, ajusté.
For example, if we go back to say 1 second after the Big Bang, at that point the expansion rate and the mass density have to have been adjusted to each other just right, so that the universe is just at this critical point. If the universe at that point were expanding just 1 part in the 15th decimal place faster, the universe would have flown apart without galaxies ever having had a chance to form. On the other hand, if the expansion rate were just a little slower than what we think by change of 1 in the 15th decimal place, then the universe would in fact have expanded to a maximum size and collapsed. We would never have even reached the time in the universe at which we're living.
Alors, ajuster comment? Eh bien, il existe ce qu'on appelle des paramètres cosmologiques. Ce sont des grandes constantes, la constante de la vitesse de la lumière, par exemple, qui fait 300 000 km à la seconde, 7 fois donc le tour de la Terre en 1 seconde. Il y a la constante de gravitation. Ce sont des chiffres, des données chiffrées, avec un zéro, une virgule, et puis parfois des dizaines de décimales derrière la virgule. Eh bien, si on changeait simplement une seule de ces décimales sur une seule de ces 20 constantes, l'univers ne pourrait pas apparaître. Eh bien, ça signifie que le hasard n'a aucun rôle à jouer à l'origine de l'univers.
How did this come about, this rather terrific luck? Of course, one of the first explanations that comes to mind is that there was a tuner or a creator, or if you like, God. And obviously for people of a theological disposition, the idea that the fine-tuning is evidence of God, of course, is wonderful.
يا نفس إن لم تظفري لا تجزعي
Consider this beautiful painting of nature. If I told you that some ink randomly fell onto the paper and made it by chance, how crazy would you think I was? You would instantly deny this and tell me that a painter designed it. If something like a painting must have a designer, how about something far more complex like the universe? Just like the painter used different colours and techniques to draw the painting, the universe is also finely tuned to perfection by many fundamentals. If the painter made a small mistake, it would ruin the painting. Similarly, if the fine-tuning of the universe were to change even by the smallest amount, it would no longer exist. Just like it is almost impossible to accidentally produce this painting, the odds are almost infinitely more impossible for the universe to accidentally come into existence. Allah challenges our intellect in a profound verse in the Qur'an. He says, "Were they created by nothing, or were they the creators of themselves, or were they the creators of the heavens and the earth? Rather, they are not certain." Firstly, Allah asks, were they created by nothing? If you think about it, you will quickly realize that this is impossible, as you cannot create something from nothing. Now apply this logic to the universe as a whole. Then Allah asks, were they the creators of themselves? For you to create yourself, you have to already exist before you were born to create yourself, which is also impossible. Now apply this same logic to the universe. Since the universe has a beginning, it could not have created itself. Finally, Allah concludes by saying, or were they the creators of the heavens and the earth? 2 points. Firstly, the universe existed billions of years before us, and to create something that existed before we were even born is impossible. Secondly, the universe is far, far greater than us. Look at the most impressive human inventions and you'll find that they're nothing compared to even a fly. Human creation is always prone to mistakes and needs teams of maintenance and support in case of breakages or errors. If something as trivial as software needs maintenance, who then is maintaining the universe? From this verse alone, Allah shows us that we could not have come from nothing, we could not have created ourselves, and we cannot create anything as incredible as the universe. So how then do we think we are intelligent enough to deny the existence of a creator? Okay, you might now be thinking, if God created the universe, who created God? Firstly, to say that God has a beginning or is created, by definition means this being can no longer be a God. But for argument's sake, let's say that the universe was created by something that is created. The next logical question is, what created that thing? And you can ask that question again and again, an infinite amount of times, and the only way to break this chain is to say that creation was created by an uncreated creator. Secondly, time is a property of the universe. Since the universe has a beginning, we use time to describe what happened from that point. Since Allah is the creator of the universe and time, it does not mean He is restricted by these laws. Hopefully, we should arrive at the rational conclusion that the universe is created and maintained by an uncreated creator. Generally, there's one person in charge. There's one captain of a ship and one king of a country. Imagine you're driving a car and both you and the person next to you have a steering wheel. Either you agree which way to turn, which shows you are both dependent on each other, or you try and turn left and the other tries turning right, and one of you overpowers the other. Now apply this logic to God. If there was more than one God, then these gods cannot be all-powerful for the same reasons, and a God that is not all-powerful, by definition, cannot be a God. Just imagine if there were two kings running a country. There would be chaos, and amazingly, Allah directly addresses this in the Qur'an. He says, had there been other gods besides Allah, they both would have been destroyed. In Islam, one of Allah's names is Al-Qahhar, the one that overpowers. He doesn't answer to anything or anyone, and His will is imposing. The biggest proof that there is only one God is the fact that there is balance in the universe. The laws of physics are consistent, the sky is always blue, and gravity is always the same. At this point, you might believe in God, but have a problem following organised religion. I mean, why should you be restricted to a specific way of life, right? But if you really think about it, you already are living your life in a specific way according to the laws of your country. Imagine if your country had no law. Life would be terrifying and everyone would be so lost. This shows us that we need direction. Not only that, but every country has slightly different laws that are constantly changing over time, which also shows us that we as humans cannot decide what is 100% right or wrong. So if we need direction but cannot decide what is objectively right or wrong, we have a problem. Where do we get the right direction from? Imagine if I gave you a car and you'd never seen one before. Guessing what to put in the fuel tank and what buttons to press is not good enough, but referring to the instruction manual provided by the manufacturer, we will know exactly how to drive the car. In the exact same way, if I want to know why am I here, where am I going, what is my purpose, I must refer to the revelation provided by the Creator. How? The answer is the Qur'an. We've all heard about Moses splitting the sea and Jesus being born a miraculous birth, but these miracles are all limited to the time and place in which they happen. The Qur'an, on the other hand, is a special miracle that was given to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and is not limited to time or place. It is a miracle that me and you can pick up, study, and experience anywhere, anytime. You can never prove that the splitting of the sea actually took place, but the Qur'an can be proved to be from God. It is a book like no other book, a speech like no other speech, and this can be shown in so many ways. For example, Allah predicted its preservation from the beginning. More than 1,400 years have passed, and the Qur'an remains in its original language completely unchanged. Since Muslims claim the Qur'an is the direct word of God, any changes, even if it was a single letter, would instantly falsify this claim. Allah challenges the reader to look for contradictions if they think the Qur'an is man-made. What we find is that the message is 100% consistent with absolutely no contradictions. Allah also told us that He would make the Qur'an easy to learn. Today, millions of people around the world have the Qur'an stored in memory. Every single generation since the Qur'an was revealed has had memorizers, making it the only book in history to have passed down in both human memory and written form. If all books were to just disappear, the only one that would be back in a day is the Qur'an. Amazingly, Allah told us that when people listen to the Qur'an being recited, they are impacted and you see them start to cry. Thanks to YouTube, we can see this happening with our own eyes. You see people who aren't even Muslim and don't even understand the language breaking down into tears. Even those who recite occasionally cry. What other speech can do this? Linguistically speaking, the Qur'an remains the best Arabic literature to date. Since Arabic is arguably the most eloquent language to ever exist, this makes the Qur'an the most eloquent speech in the most eloquent language in history. The language of the Qur'an alone is enough to prove that it could not have come from man. To add to this, the Qur'an is also jam-packed full of scientific and historical accuracies that were impossible to have been known 14 centuries ago. From the Big Bang to the expansion of the universe and to every living thing being made from water. From the two seas that meet but don't mix to the accurate description of the human embryo. In fact, there are more than 1,000 scientific verses in the book and not a single one of them can be disproved by established science. For those who are spiritual, it magnifies our spirituality. For those who are intellectual, it challenges our rationality. And the Qur'an, by far, is the most popular book in the world that is read billions of times every single day, week in, week out, all year round. For these reasons, Muslims can proudly claim that the Qur'an is self-evident to be entirely from God. If you are still skeptical, pick up a Qur'an and read it for yourself. The Qur'an was revealed during the age of literature and poetry 1400 years ago. Now, we live in the age of science and technology. In the Qur'an, there are more than 6,000 signs, out of which over 1,000 speak about science. Today, the Qur'an remains unchallenged and is by far the best Arabic literature to date. This is great, but with the rapid progression of science and technology, can we say the Qur'an has stood the test of time, or has it become a tale of the past? Allah speaks about the field of astronomy. The Big Bang states that the universe originated from a single point and expanded into the stars and galaxies we know today. Way before this theory, the Qur'an says, "Have those who disbelieved not considered that the heavens and the earth were joined together as one entity, then we separated them?" Similarly, the expansion of the universe can also be found in the Qur'an, along with all celestial bodies in orbit and planets alternating night and day. What's amazing is if we take the words in the verse used for all celestial bodies in orbit and split them into their individual letters, they mirror each other and appear as if they are in orbit. Science has found that the solar system is not stationary, but is in fact moving towards a fixed point known as the solar apex. Science also tells us that the sun's fuel will eventually run out, causing it to die. The Qur'an captures both these points in one verse, and more specifically, one single word. Without the atmosphere, life on Earth would not be possible. It shields us from tons of small meteorites showering the Earth every single day, and it filters out harmful radiation that would otherwise cause severe genetic damage. Saying that, the Qur'an refers to the sky as a protected ceiling. Allah speaks about the field of oceanology. Specifically, Allah talks about two seas that meet, one fresh and sweet, and one salty and bitter, and between them is a barrier. William Hay, a famous marine scientist, explained that these two seas have varying temperature, density, and salinity. When water from one sea passes to the other, it becomes homogenized, resulting in what the Qur'an refers to as the forbidding barrier. The Qur'an talks about the darkness in the depths of vast, deep oceans, where if a man stretches out his hand, he can hardly see it. Without modern equipment, the deepest a human can dive is about 20 meters. Only after 200 meters is sunlight absorbed rapidly, and the Qur'an said this way before any equipment 1400 years ago. Allah speaks about the field of geology. Frank Press, a famous geophysicist, highlighted the importance of mountains in stabilizing the Earth's crust from shaking. The Qur'an specifically mentions this. Thanks to modern technology, we have found that mountains are typically much deeper than they are high. Think of tent pegs. They are pushed deep into the ground to stop the tent from flying away, and you only see a small part of it on the outside. Amazingly, the Qur'an refers to mountains as pegs. Allah speaks about the field of biology. In just a few lines, the Qur'an gives a description of how the human is formed, which science has proved is in the correct chronological order. Particularly, Allah describes the embryo using the word alaqa, which has three separate meanings when translated. 1. A blood clot, 2. Something that clings, and 3. A leech. The first two meanings, without a doubt, resemble the embryo accurately, but a leech? Here is an image of an embryo next to a leech. Here is an X-ray of an embryo next to the internal structure of a leech. And here are microscopic images of the head of an embryo and the back end of a leech. To top this off, these verses end with Allah saying, "We brought it forth as another creation." With great advancements in science, we now know that the initial stages of development in many animals are strikingly similar. Today, science has shown that gender is determined by a pair of sex chromosomes where XX is for females and XY is for males. It is the sperm that carries the genetic information for X or Y, whilst the female egg can only carry X, and the Qur'an specifically summarizes this. In the Qur'an, Allah says that every living thing has been made from water. Because of the cytoplasm in cells, 70% of the human body is made up of water. Consider this. Allah mentions that He created all pairs, but amazingly, He says from that which they do not know. Only recently we are discovering more of nature is found in pairs, as Allah says. The Qur'an states that every living thing, whether on the earth, in the earth, or in the sky, is found in communities. As you know, there are thousands of documentaries that are widely available that show just how fascinating animals are in their communities. In the Qur'an, Allah quotes a conversation between ants. In these verses, they tell each other to hide so that they aren't crushed by the people walking by. For centuries, people mocked these verses, calling them a fairy tale in which ants speak to each other. We now know that ants are a lot more similar to humans than most animals. For example, they bury their dead, they have marketplaces where they exchange goods, and they occasionally meet for a chat. They have advanced communication methods, and in the workplace, they have sophisticated division of labour from managers to supervisors to workers. In just 2 verses, Allah tells us many things about the bee. Worker bees that gather pollen and make the honey are actually females. Male bees do not make honey. In these verses, the verbs used for worker bees are female. In these same verses, Allah tells us that honey comes from the belly of the bee, which science has confirmed. Additionally, the word used for belly is plural, meaning more than one. Science now tells us that bees have 2 stomachs. Again, in these verses, Allah tells us that honey is a healing for the people. Today, we now know that honey has medicinal and antiseptic properties. These are such subtle details, but have proven 100% accurate. And to conclude, Allah ends these verses by saying, "Indeed, in that is a sign for people who think." It is important to note that the Qur'an is not a book of science. It is a book of signs for people to contemplate and to make an intellectual decision. Saying that, not a single scientific sign in the Qur'an can be proved wrong by established science. What's fascinating is that the Qur'an was recited by a man who could not read or write over 23 years in jumbled up order. Despite all of this, the Qur'an contains 0 contradictions and has strikingly accurate statements that we have only come to know so many years later.
As my knowledge of science grew, 25 years ago, in basically a flash, I came to the conclusion that the universe is so perfectly made and everything so perfectly matches together that there must be God and only one God. So I accepted there is God, but I was not looking for a religion. I thought all religions are wrong. Christians say this is one. The Jews said Jews are chosen people, and if you're not Jew, you're not chosen. And about Islam, I only had negative information.
So how does one distinguish with all the different ways of life, calling to people, telling them that they're the only way? How do we distinguish what's the right way with all this confusion?
First of all, let's get this straight. It has to be really easy to tell if Islam is a true religion or a fake religion. And it has to be real easy to see which religion on earth is the one from Allah and which is the one from men, from devils, from con men, what have you. It can't be that the one true religion from Allah, that's generally from God, is going to look exactly, and not discernible from the one that's from devils, the one that's written by men, or made up by men, or altered by men, and I can't tell which is the one authored by Allah and which is the one authored by people. It can't be.
Then he finished the sentence. He said, I'll go to your faith. It's better than my faith, but you'll need proof. And I said, man, religion has never been about proof. It's about faith. That's it. That's what religion is. He said, in Islam, we have both. We have proof and faith. We have both. We have proof and faith. We have both. We have proof and faith.
So different people from different religions used to knock on my door. And once the discussions got down to evidence, they had no answers. And that wasn't going to fly with me. And then I discovered Islam. And shortly after, I became Muslim.
1,400 years ago, when the world was immersed in darkness, the Qur'an was revealed, which brought light to a beleaguered world. And whereas the earlier books came with many scientific mistakes, due to the hand of man having delved into them, the Qur'an had none of these contradictions. The world thought there could be no reconciliation between religion and science. But the Qur'an mentioned many scientific facts in great detail, like how a human being developed in the mother's womb.
As a medical doctor, particularly attracted to natural sciences and physiology, I must confess that in 1972, when I read the Quran in the original text for the first time, these data concerning man were those which impressed me most.
Muhammad could not have known these facts about human development in the 7th century because most of them were not discovered until the 20th century. Muslims and others are justified in concluding that these facts could only have been revealed to Muhammad by the one who knows all about us, not only about how we developed, but how we live and function.
And described other scientific facts which amaze the world's renowned scientists.
Actually, I'm very much impressed by finding true astronomical facts in Quran.
Thinking of many of these questions and thinking where Muhammad came from, he was after all a Bedouin. I think it is almost impossible that he could have known about things like the common origin of the universe, because scientists have only found out within the last few years, with very complicated and advanced technological methods, that this is the case.
Let me go straight to the second argument, which is about the miraculous nature of the Quran. The Quran being a signpost to the transcendent. What I mean by this is that the Quran can only best explained by the fact that it is a divine book. And I'm going to use the inimitability of the Quran for this. Now, what do I mean by inimitability? What I mean by inimitability is that the Quran cannot be emulated, reproduced, matched or copied with regards to its literary and linguistic features.
But since Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the last messenger that was sent to mankind, isn't it fair that his message, the miracle that came with him and his message be preserved till the end of time, so that humans can still make that judgment call whether this miracle and message is in fact man-made or divine, man-made or divine.
And then when I was maybe about 1/3 in Quran, I remember telling my wife, you know, this Muhammad, he must have been a very smart, very intelligent man, because this book is very clear, very logical, very easy to follow, and there are no contradictions. But then as I read later, I suddenly saw a scientific fact which I knew was only discovered in the 20th century. So immediately I saw that Muhammad is not the author of the Quran. That Muhammad is a messenger sent by God to give the Quran to mankind. Muhammad is a messenger sent by God to give the Quran to mankind.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثة فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم ثلة من الأولين ثلة من الأولين وقليل من الآخرين على سرر موضونة متكئين عليها متقابلين يطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون بأكواب وأباريق وكأس من معين لا يصدعون عنها ولا ينزفون وفاكهة مما يتخيرون ولحم طير مما يشتهون وحور عين كأمثال اللؤلؤ المكنون جزاء بما كانوا يعملون لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا تأثيما إلا قيلا سلاما سلاما وأصحاب اليمين ما أصحاب اليمين في سدر مخضود وطلح منضود وظل ممدود وماء مسكوب وفاكهة كثيرة لا مقطوعة ولا ممنوعة وفرش مرفوعة إنا أنشأناهن إنشاء فجعلناهن أبكارا عربا أترابا لأصحاب اليمين ثلة من الأولين وثلة من الآخرين وأصحاب الشمال ما أصحاب الشمال في سموم وحميم وظل من يحموم لا بارد ولا كريم إنهم كانوا قبل ذلك مترفين وكانوا يصرون على الحنث العظيم وكانوا يقولون أئذا متنا وكنا ترابا وعظاما أئنا لمبعوثون أو آباؤنا الأولون لمجموعون قل إن الأولين والآخرين لمجموعون إلى ميقات يوم معلوم ثم إنكم أيها الضالون المكذبون لآكلون من شجر من زقوم فمالئون منها البطون فشاربون عليه من الحميم فشاربون شرب الهيم هذا نزلهم يوم الدين نحن خلقناكم فلولا تصدقون أفرأيتم ما تمنون أأنتم تخلقونه أم نحن الخالقون نحن قدرنا بينكم الموت وما نحن بمسبوقين على أن نبدل أمثالكم وننشئكم فيما لا تعلمون ولقد علمتم النشأة الأولى فلولا تذكرون أفرأيتم ما تحرثون أأنتم تزرعونه أم نحن الزارعون لو نشاء لجعلناه حطاما فظلتم تفكهون إنا لمغرمون بل نحن محرومون أفرأيتم الماء الذي تشربون أأنتم أنزلتموه من المزن أم نحن المنزلون لو نشاء جعلناه أجاجا فلولا تشكرون أفرأيتم النار التي تورون أأنتم أنشأتم شجرتها أم نحن المنشئون نحن جعلناها تذكرة ومتاعا للمقوين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم فلا أقسم بمواقع النجوم وإنه لقسم لو تعلمون عظيم إنه لقرآن كريم في كتاب مكنون لا يمسه إلا المطهرون تنزيل من رب العالمين أفبهذا الحديث أنتم مدهنون وتجعلون رزقكم أنكم تكذبون فلولا إذا بلغت الحلقوم وأنتم حينئذ تنظرون ونحن أقرب إليه منكم ولكن لا تبصرون فلولا إن كنتم غير مدينين ترجعونها إن كنتم صادقين فأما إن كان من المقربين فروح وريحان وجنة نعيم وأما إن كان من أصحاب اليمين فسلام لك من أصحاب اليمين وأما إن كان من المكذبين الضالين فنزل من حميم وتصلية جحيم إن هذا لهو حق اليقين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم